Good morning, everyone, and I welcome you all to the second episode of our talk series of the SARS-CoV-2 surveillance by genomic sequencing, where we're aiming to understand why is a sequencing-based approach necessary for us to understand the frequently mutating SARS-CoV-2, and utilizing the context of this information vis-a-vis the pandemic surveillance and how we can manage the pandemic better. We're currently through all the sequencing effort that has happened in the country over the last many months. We're currently at a juncture where we have some information on the viral variants of concern. However, we have a long way to go considering our massive population and the scope of the virus to evolve and mutate. Right? We know that typically when the aim of the virus is basically to survive, right? And hence through multiple mutations, the virus tends to become mild, in the history of virology that we've studied. But somehow SARS-CoV-2 tends to violate all or defy all norms. So what is it about the virus, that are making the mutations much more pathogenic or transmissible, making the strains much more transmissible, etc. In short, we will try and address through this talk the what, why, and how of sequencing-based surveillance of COVID-19, right? And our today's speaker is someone who deftly utilizes genomic prowess to address some of these questions. He's essentially a molecular oncologist, and he's heading the Laboratory of Molecular Oncology in CDFT. But he has taken up the effort of genomic sequencing of the SARS-CoV-2 under the aegis of INSACOG and CDFT. Right? I'll just basically outline a bit about his illustrious history. He's been associated in the past with the Wistar Institute, the National Cancer Institute, Stanford University School of Medicine. And Dr. Basham is also an elected member of the Association of UICC, the National Academy of Sciences, and American Association of Cancer Research. He's a life member of the Association, Indian Association of Cancer Research, National Science Congress, India, and SBC, Society of Biological Chemists, India, etc. And he's also associated with the Association of Microbiologists of India. And throughout his career, he's been a recipient of many, many prestigious national and international awards, including the National Bioscience Award for Career Development from the Department of Biotechnology, the Faculty from Developing Countries Award from the American Association of Cancer Research USA, Fogati International Research Collaboration Award from the Fogati International Center, etc. Right? So it's a long list, and what I've recounted for you is basically by no means exhaustive. So he's basically working, as I said, but he's nicely utilized his expertise in the genomics area to shift gears, or to segue rather, not shifted gears, to segue into the understanding of SARS-CoV-2. And it'll be, I'm sure it's going to be an exciting, hear from him as to how he went about doing what he did and what is the insight that he got from the wonderful work that he has done with his team in CDFT. So over to you, Dr. Basham. Please hold the stage.
Thank you, Devjani. The slides are visible and you can hear me clearly?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thanks again, Devjani, for a slightly longish introduction, but and I also thank Premas Life Science for giving me this opportunity to present our work in the form of a webinar, so which has become part of our life now for the past 1.5 years. I'm going to touch upon what CDFT has done towards genome sequencing of SARS-CoV-2 isolates, and also as part of the INSACOG, what we are doing and what we plan to do in the near future. But to start off, I will show a very familiar slide to most of you, the COVID-19 timeline. So we all know it was reported in December from Wuhan, China, the first infection. And then in January, we had the first confirmed case in India in Kerala last year. Then 11th March, WHO declared COVID-19 as a pandemic. And in December, we identified the first B.1.617 variant, popularly and actually redesignated as Delta variant by WHO, and also classified as a variant of concern. And 16th January, Government of India implemented the mass vaccination program. And I would like to highlight what has happened since then in India, and what the collection of scientists from all over India have been doing, and what we have achieved, and what we plan to do in the near future. Looking at the numbers, so in India right now we have close to 3 crore cases. This is data as of July 5, 2021 from Government of India portal. It's updated every second, every minute. We have total deaths of close to 4 lakhs, and currently the active cases are close to 5 lakhs in the country. And in comparison to the world, we can see that we probably represent a major fraction of the cases that are present in the world. And there are some things which are noticeable if you look at the total cases versus active cases. You can see the region around Delhi, the active cases seem to be reducing, but in the West and South India, we still seem to have a larger proportion of active cases. So that is something which Government of India is closely monitoring, because it has public health implications. Okay, so there are 2 things which I want to highlight, which all of us have learned about this infection. First and foremost, 90% of the infected cases have very mild disease. Many of them don't have symptoms. Most of them have very mild symptoms. So it is predicted that it's likely to become an endemic, and that's what we hope. And probably it's going to happen very soon, keeping our fingers crossed. And what is the current need? So there are 3 aspects that people have been working on, the scientists all over the world, starting from last year, to develop efficient vaccines. We already have several in the market, government funded or through public-private partnerships. And people are working on antiviral therapeutics, whether it's through development of antibodies or through drugs. And there's also enough sufficient emphasis on developing rapid diagnosis, but yeah, it has to be accurate, sensitive, and specific. The 4th aspect where CDFD and some of the other labs come in is genomics. So where does genomics fit in terms of current need for COVID-19 management? So I'm going to take 2 examples of where genomics has been successful, which is also what we have been doing in CDFD. One is cancer, of course. We know there are driver mutations in cancers. You sequence tumor genomes and you can identify these mutations. Some of them are actionable. And these mutations, when you look at them in collection, you also can find out specific signatures. There are different signatures which drive different tumors. So tobacco exposure has a different mutation signature. Methylation will have a different mutation signature, and so on and so forth. So looking at these signatures, it's possible to predict what could have been the probable exposure that caused the cancer. And of course, these mutations also go a long way in assisting clinicians for prognostication, but also to decide what kind of treatment to do. And those kind of clinical questions are helpful. On the other hand, genomics has also been helpful to tackle rare genetic disorders. So these are monogenic disorders. And you have unexplained familial syndromes where you don't know what is the gene involved. You only have the symptoms. You have different families. So using whole genome or exome sequencing, it has been possible to successfully identify disease-causing genes. Some of the examples are shown on the right side. And there are now several consortia which are looking at sequencing various families with unexplained genetic disorders, and this is something which CDFD's diagnostics division is also actively undertaking. But when we come to genomics of SARS-CoV-2, what do we think we can achieve through sequencing of SARS-CoV-2 isolates? So it can be used to identify variants which can be associated with severe disease and outcomes. So I said close to 90% of infected individuals are mildly symptomatic. So what about the rest of that 5 to 10%? They have a severe disease, or there's a large proportion of lethality. Is it caused by a novel variant? That can be identified when we sequence virus strain from asymptomatic versus people having very severe infection, disease, or outcome. Similarly, we can find out if there is a particular variant associated with vaccine breakthrough or repeat infections. Are there other association with pediatric cases? Are there association with recurrent or prolonged illness in patients? What about predisposition to other infections? There is evidence of a lot of fungal infections during the last 2 months in the second wave in India. Then what about long-term implications? Are there variants which may cause specific neurological, cardiac, or other complications after the patient has recovered? Okay, so all these factors can be associated with SARS-CoV-2 variants. So it is important to sequence the virus from different clinical isolates. The other and equally important aspect is to do host genomics, which we have not addressed to the extent that probably we should have, but we are now gearing up to also in parallel sequence the patient's DNA to see if some of these aspects are not related to viral variants, but a combination of the variant plus the host genotype or specific polymorphisms or other changes in the DNA that combine with the variants and give rise to these adverse clinical symptoms. So if you look at the SARS-CoV-2 proteome, we all know the virus is an unsegmented single-stranded positive strand RNA virus, close to 30 kb of RNA, and since it's a positive strand, it's directly translated to proteins, and then depending on the action of RNA-dependent RNA polymerase, the negative strand is made, and then several copies of the viruses are made subsequently. So the mutations can arise in any of these proteins, the non-structural proteins, which are mostly involved in replication and transcription of a virus, or the structural proteins, where of course the most important is the spike protein, which has been the focus of attention of most sequencing approaches during the past few months. So at CDFD, when we decided to start work on SARS-CoV-2 last year, sometime in March, there was no virologist in CDFD at that time. Actually, I should make this statement. None of us was a virologist, but we were very fortunate to have the then director, Dr. Devashish Mitra, who was the CDFD director, one of the top virologists in the country. So when we set up the dedicated RT-PCR testing facility in CDFD, he was there with us when we set up the lab, the BSL-2 facility, and all the accessories. So we were confident that we had a virologist who could kind of confirm whatever the way we were setting up the facility. And later, when we transitioned from RT-PCR to genome sequencing, again, we were fortunate that the subsequent director and the present director who joined after Devashish, Dr. Thangaraj, a long-standing experience in genomics. So again, we have been very lucky to have during the transition phase Dr. Thangaraj as our current director. So the RT-PCR facility was set up by me with Ashwin Rashna and Hari Narayanan, and starting last year in July, we had another project scientist joining, Dr. Lilina Basu, and she has been almost single-handedly now taking care of the RT-PCR facility and also helping us with the genome sequencing efforts. Currently, we have capacity to sequence actually more than 1,500 genomes per month. So that's how we have set up the genome sequencing facility for SARS-CoV-2 sequencing. So coming back to the RT-PCR, it's a standard facility that is applied in many other labs in India. So starting with the sample collection, which the state government accomplishes and sends us the sample in viral transport medium. from where we isolate the RNA and convert it to cDNA, then do the quantitative PCR, and then based on the results, we report it back to the clinicians, which is basically the state government officials. Just to briefly talk about the lab that we set up last year. Yeah, it is slightly complicated, but I would like you to focus on the right side where we have the viral sampling handling lab, including the class 2 type A2 biosafety cabinet established. So this is an enclosed room with very restricted entry, and the samples come from behind this room. So the samples are not exposed to any other area in CDFD. And these samples are brought in and they stay here till the virus is isolated and the RNA is isolated from the virus. And then the RNA goes to the RNA lab. So virus, even if you have to store the virus, it stays in the viral sampling handling lab. Once it comes to the RNA lab, the RNA is isolated and then the quantitative PCR is set up and the results are reported in this room. And if you see on the left side, we have the personnel coming in through that door. So the personnel who are not involved in virus handling will stay here. They don't enter the viral sampling handling lab. So we were able to segregate these two activities efficiently in the testing lab, and it's been working fine now. And it's been close to 15 months. We have been doing the testing since April 2020. So last year, then we thought of starting with genome sequence of SARS-CoV-2, and I had fortunately a computational biologist in my lab, a very dedicated and intelligent postdoc, Dr. Asmita Gupta. So I talked to her whether we could do this activity, and she said yes. So, and there was also a requirement from DBT that CDFD should start sequencing the virus. So we established this pipeline initially based on the information available in the Arctic network, where it's a resource for assisting groups in sequencing the virus. So there are standardized protocols, primer sets, and other resources available. So we ordered the primer sets, which are basically multiplexed tiled primers, and did the PCR. Then we made sure all the regions of the genome were efficiently amplified. Wherever we found less amplification, we could redo the PCR and spike into the pool. And using the NAB Next Ultra kit, we then did the sequencing based on single and 100 base pair reads. All these sequencing work was actually done in the National Genomics Core of CDFD, where we have dedicated staff doing different projects related to genomics, not only from CDFD, but also from outside. And last 3 or 4 months, we have shifted to using the COVID-seq Illumina pipeline. But again, the basic workflow is same as we were doing earlier. So once the sequencing is done, then comes the more challenging part, that is to analyze the sequence, call the variants, and see if there are any variants of concern. So to establish the computational pipeline, we took the help of our collaborator, Dr. Sabari Nathan from NCBS. And Sabari and Asmita then established this pipeline, starting from quality check, trimming, then alignment, and again, standard pipeline, which many other labs in India are using. So we generate the FASTA, which is then also uploaded to GISAID. And then the variant calling either based on IVAR, or if we are interested in low frequency variants, which very few of us are doing right now, but we are one of the few who are looking using a pipeline called LowFreq to identify very, very low frequency variants. So these are important to identify, because if there is a new mutation emerging anywhere in the samples, it may be at a very low fraction in a particular sample. And it may be missed if we have a standard cutoff. So we lower the cutoff, apply this pipeline to identify low frequency variants in the samples. And the FASTA files are then also used for lineage analysis, which there are two ways to do it. Either identify the lineage using pangolin, or do the genomic timeline epidemiology using the NextTrain pipeline. So I will just briefly explain these two pipelines. So Nextgen is mostly used to look at the timeline of evolution of the virus at a particular location, and it basically then looks at the mutations and see, and if you and calculates how the virus has evolved across a given timeline. The way the strains are called, these are called clades as per Nextgen nomenclature. So the initial number indicates the year. So the Wuhan strain would have the prefix of 19, and the strains which we identified in India, so like in Telangana, we identified 20B. So that is called 20B because it was identified in the year 2020. And this is how the strains are labeled when you use the Nextgen pipeline. The pangolin is a slightly different objective. The pangolin identifies or generates a nomenclature to reflect on the growing genetic diversity of the virus. So basically, depending on the number and type of mutations in the sample you have sequenced, it will build a tree with the existing other samples and then give a standard nomenclature to that virus, and then again you can build a tree to see how it associates with the other strains which have been sequenced. So again, the lineage designations are given by a capital letter followed by either a small letter or numbers, and these again indicate how close or away each strain is or each lineage is with the other lineages. So when we started this work last year, like I said, the first batch of samples we sequenced was between April and June. And this part of the work is already published in the Journal of General Virology. And so we established the 20B clade as the major clade in Telangana. Okay, so there's something popping up. Okay, so we established 20B as a major clade in Telangana during the period April to June 2020. We were also one of the first ones to identify a huge proportion of asymptomatic cases which appeared to be associated with higher viral load, and this was subsequently also reported by other groups. Okay, so like I said, we were initially interested in the identification of high frequency genomic variants. So this slide shows the high frequency mutations that we identified across the genome. And you see there is only one high frequency mutation which we identified in the spike protein, which was identified by all laboratories across the world last year. That is the classical D614G mutation, which still is present in the current lineages which are prevalent in most countries in the world. The other mutations which here are denoted as high frequency, they are also, they're not in spike protein, they are in other regions of the genome, but they are also, most of them are still present in the viral strains presently. But the 4 mutations which are indicated by arrows, these were novel mutations which we identified only in Telangana. They were not identified in other states in India. But these mutations are no longer present in the virus strains which are circulating presently. Okay, so a few months ago, the government of India set up an interministerial and interdepartmental national surveillance network called the Indian SARS-CoV-2 Genomics Consortium, or INSACOG for short. So this is an excellent collaboration between different ministries and different departments of the ministries, the Ministry of Health as well as the Ministry of Science and Technology. An example of how a national project was implemented with in a rapid and efficient manner, with several tens and many scientists coming together with their unique expertise and trying to help to tackle this severe pandemic in India. So the INSACOG initiated with 2 main objectives. The first objective is to establish a sentinel surveillance for early detection of genomic variants, which would have public health implications. And secondly, to also correlate the genomic variants with unusual events. These could be super spreader events or events associated with high mortality or morbidity, or like I mentioned, vaccine breakthrough or reinfections. So these were the 2 broad objectives. And the way the INSACOG was set up by the government is to have National Center for Disease Control, which is an ICMR institute in Delhi, as the nodal center. And they have been doing this for many, many decades for so many other infectious diseases. And NCDC was then given the task, which they accomplished brilliantly, to establish centers in each state and union territory of India based on the state nodal officers which were present, which including officials from state government health machinery, as well as the representatives of NCDC, which are present in each and every state and union territory. So what was done was to ask each state to send 15 samples per fortnight from each site in the state, and 10 such sites were identified in each state and union territory. So totaling to about total of 150 samples per fortnight, which translates to 300 samples per state per month. And this all coordination was done by NCDC, and each of these states or union territories were linked with one of the 10 regional genome sequencing laboratories where the sequencing was done. So a lab in, let's say, in CDFD, we got samples from Telangana, and like CCMB also in Hyderabad, also getting samples from Andhra. But given the sequencing capacity of these institutes, and we could do more samples, so NCDC was quick to coordinate and send samples from different other states, so which I would briefly share in the subsequent slides. So all these 10 sequencing laboratories then do the genome sequencing and identify the variants of concern. The data is uploaded into two data portals. One is instituted in NIBMG in Kalyani, which is a DBT institution, and the other in Institute of Genomics and Integrated Biology, which is a CSIR institute present in Delhi. So data is uploaded into these two portals, where analysis is again done and confirmed. And the 10 labs also report the variants directly to NCDC in coordination with the state nodal officers, so that if a potential variant is identified, then the state government health machinery can be immediately activated. So this is how the pipeline has been established, and it's been going on quite smoothly for the past few months. So these are the variants of concern which are identified by WHO, which again, this is available is public information available in WHO website. So like I mentioned, and all of you probably know, the Delta variant, or the B.1.617.2, is the major variant in India right now. So it was detected early in October 2020. The other important variants of concern identified by WHO include the Alpha or the B.1.7 lineage, which was first detected in UK, the Beta variant, which was first detected in South Africa, and the Gamma variant, which was first detected in Brazil. There are some other variants like the Lambda, which is also a variant of interest classified by WHO. So this is what INSACOG has accomplished till now. INSACOG, through the 10 laboratories, has sequenced more than 40,000 genomes in the past few months. And this is a map showing all the data uploaded in the INSACOG portal, starting from genomes starting from April 2020 up to June 2020. And it's very clear that the B.617.2 or the Delta lineage is the predominant lineage in India at this moment. What Asmita has done recently is to access the data which is freely available in GSAID, where all the COVID sequencing raw data or the FASTA files are uploaded by everybody in the world. And through the NextTrend pipeline, she was able to make this timeline of viral clade evolution. So in India, if you see right now, the two dominant lineages, we already know about the Delta lineage, which is B.1.617.2. But on the top, you can see in blue the B.1.7 lineage, which is the one which was detected in UK initially, and it also spread in North India more than South. But like I said, right now majority of strains in India belong to the Delta variant. So in parallel, she analyzed data available in GSAID from other countries. So this is the worldwide trend right now. So if you look at the whole world, what kind of strains are propagating and how they evolved, you can see again from March to June, there are these 4 lineages which are predominant, and these are the lineages which are identified as variants of concern by the WHO. If you look at Europe separately, because of the high prevalence of B.1.1.7 strain, that is probably the predominant strain in Europe currently. And again, if you look at US, also B.1.1.7 currently is more prominent along with the P1 and the Delta strains. The new variant of concern, which was detected 1 or 2 months ago, or maybe in May or June in India, very recently, is what the newspapers call as the Delta Plus strain, and the pangolin lineage name is AY.1. So this mutation arose by the virus acquiring the KA417N mutation, the spike protein, in addition to the signature mutations which define the Delta strain. So this has now been designated by WHO also as a variant of concern. And right now, there are about 50 cases in India as per the data available in the INSACOG portal. And all the state governments have been sensitized to, and all the sequencing laboratories also have been sensitized to keep a track of this variant, because this is something which has emerged very recently. So this is a tabulation of the samples that we have sequenced as part of our work for the INSACOG. So like I said, although we are designated to sequence samples from Telangana and other adjoining areas, we have received samples through the efforts of NCDC from not only Andhra Pradesh but also far-flung states like Himachal, Punjab, Maharashtra, and Manipur. And once the samples are received, we finish the sequencing, identify the variants, and report it back to the NCDC as well as to the respective state government officers. So now I would present, because majority of samples that we have sequenced are from Telangana. So I present data a little bit to show our experience with what we have identified so far. So like I said, we started sequencing from April last year. And whatever we sequenced till June, July, we published in the Journal of General Virology. And then there was a brief lull where the number of samples declined and we were sequencing less. But once INSACOG came up, we ramped up our sequencing. And as you see, during April, May, and also June, we have sequenced a much larger number of samples. And this is the timeline of variant evolution, again starting from last year. And you can see initially in March we saw the emergence of the B.1.617.1, but April, May, and June we have the predominance of the Delta strain, which is same in most of the other states in India. And we also looked at the spike protein mutations in the samples from Telangana. So this data shows the mutation that we have identified from January onwards, and you could see all of these mutations, which are present in 300 or more samples, are actually signature mutations that define the Delta strain. There are some other mutations which we found in less than 200 samples, and some of them are part of Delta strain, some of them are part of the other strains which were prevalent during February, March in Telangana. It is interesting to compare this plot with the one which we generated last year. So on the top, you see the spike mutations which were present in more than 10% of the samples for samples which we sourced during April to December 2020. And basically, there's only one mutation which stands out, that is the D614G. So the virus was evolving, but for some reason not acquiring mutations in the spike protein or major mutation in spike protein. But starting from January, it started acquiring these new mutations, and that's how we got the Delta variant, which then took over and was causing most of the infections, and is still causing most of the infections in Telangana. So this is nice to see a stark contrast between how the virus evolved. Last year, we had mutations in other proteins, other genes, not in the spike protein, but now we have major mutations in the spike protein, which also correlated with the rampant second wave in Telangana and other parts of the country. This plot shows the mutations that we have identified as part of the different VOCs in Telangana. Like other mutations which are not in the spike protein but help the virus to evade the immune response are possible. But again, the immune response, the effective immune response probably will also be targeted against the spike protein. So a mutation in the spike protein helps the virus to infect more, plus also helps to evade the immune response. So it is less likely, but yes, we are seeing mutations in other proteins. But it's difficult to correlate the spread with a particular mutation. Yeah, it's not very easy unless you do studies based on in vitro studies for specific mutations.
Shraddha, you can go ahead with your
you can hear me?
Yeah. Sorry, Shraddha, you were waiting. Yeah,
it's
please
okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So actually, sir, I had a question that we know that the below 18 population has not been vaccinated yet, right? So have we considered this population for mutation studies?
Yeah. So we, like I mentioned, the pediatric population. So we get samples from all age groups. There is no restriction. And every lab, the 10 or the 28 sequencing laboratories or some of the state governments, if they want to push for pediatric cases, it's very welcome. So all the states and all the labs are sequencing the pediatric population as well. Yes, definitely.
Okay. Maybe I missed the starting part. I joined it late. But have we studied the age-related graphs then in between? I mean, compared the age-related mutations?
So it's an ongoing study, but till now there is no report of a mutations or variant which is more clustering in the pediatric population. But it is also true that the pediatric numbers are not too high. We don't have that many. We and other labs sequence more than, but we don't see anything like that so far.
Okay, sir.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Vanishri, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, sir, thank you so much. Good morning, sir. I'm Dr. Vanishri, Nodal Officer for Gandhi Medical College.
Yeah.
I'm associate professor here. So I've been helping Nagani madam in the sentinel site surveillance and contacting all the doctors of all the 10 centers, and a lot of effort is being put up for procuring the samples and sending it to CDFD, sir.
Yeah,
and you have
yeah.
mentioned in your thank you slide also. Thank you so much for that,
Sure.
for acknowledging.
You are doing the main job, actually.
Yeah, thank you, sir. But my main thought, and most of our doctors are the thought is like already it is known that it is a Delta variant and Delta plus variant. So most of the results are again Delta variant and Delta plus variants in our state too, sir. So how does this help in for the future, sir? Like, well, does it help in the treatment part or preparing of vaccine, a new type of vaccine, or like how does it help knowing the doing the sequencing and knowing the which variant?
Yeah, so the importance of sequencing for the future is to predict or to sensitize the state and central public health organizations against a variant, an emerging variant. So Delta is already done. Okay, but we are still sequencing. We're going to sequence for the next few months, maybe throughout the year, depending on how long the infection lasts. But the idea now is to Delta came and we got it as soon as it emerged. But now the idea is, like I was mentioning, to identify a newer mutation which is in the spike protein, is in a domain where it could be potentially interesting or concerning, and then to follow it up. So the state government does its job by contact tracing of the patient where this particular variant has emerged, and we keep looking for that mutation in the subsequent samples that come in. So if we see it rising, then we know and we inform the NCDC, and then if they classify it as a variant of concern, then the state government machinery is activated. So that's the whole idea of establishing this sentinel. Not that, okay, Delta is there, we know Delta is there. So that the story doesn't end there. It is, the next variant which is going to come in. Can we catch it before it spreads? That's
will
the
it
whole
help
idea.
in the preparation of vaccines, coming up vaccines?
So far, there is no study which says that these different variants that have come in starting from January, February have been, predominantly associated with vaccine breakthrough. So right now, the two major vaccines in India appear to be doing okay against these variants. So it's not of concern. Okay. But yes, like I said, if we identify variants and the virus culturing labs do the in vitro studies and they identify a variant which does not, work using the neutralizing antibodies for these vaccines, then it becomes a matter of concern. But I don't see that happening. But that's the whole idea of doing the sequence and the work done from these virus culturing labs.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for the information.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Vanishri. Dr. Manjula, you want to take a mic next? I think you're unmuted from our side. I think you just have to unmute yourself and ask it. Okay. While she unmutes herself and all, we go on to the next set of questions. Nandini has asked a question. She says, were there some regions which were more prone to PCR failure in the first round, or was it random? So I think
I didn't understand. I'm sorry. So she's talking about sequencing or testing?
I think I know. She's asked it pretty early in the talk.
Can you repeat the question?
Were there some regions which were more prone to PCR failure in the first round, or was it random?
Okay, no, it was not. Okay, I get it now. So basically, she's talking about regions of the genome. I thought she was talking about regions in the country. Yeah. So like, yes. So
you might want to raise a question.
Yeah, I can answer that. I understood the question. Yeah. So what she's asking is, I mentioned some of the regions were poorly represented when we did the PCR, and we did the re-PCR and pooled. So these were not random, but these are regions which everybody reported PCR failures across the world using the primer sets which were designed by the Arctic pipeline. And this is something we already knew, and we didn't, find additional regions. It was the same regions that others reported, and we could tackle it efficiently. But now with the COVID-seq pipeline, it's much better. There are still 1 or 2 regions where the depth may be poor, but otherwise it's pretty good.
Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Prasanna Lakshmi, is there a question? Deepti, do you want to ask a question? Okay, she has her hand raised, but then I'll just mute her for now. Dr. Prasanna Lakshmi has asked a question. She said, we recently received our whole genome sequencing results as V.1 and V.1.1 for a few samples. What does this imply?
Okay, so like I mentioned, the lineage, this is the way the lineages are defined in as per pangolin classification. So B.1 is a parent strain, and B.1.1 has acquired additional mutations, so it's a sublineage of B.1. And as per pangolin, if I remember correctly, you can't go beyond 3 decimal places. So once it crosses a 3rd decimal, then it redesignates it as a separate lineage and changes the letter. So B can become A or C or something like that. But it just, tells you at a single glance how close or far you are from the parent strain. So B.1.1 is pretty close to B.1, which is the parent strain or the parent lineage.
Okay. I hope this answers your question. Are there any potential mutations possible through which SARS-CoV-2 can enter non-ACE2 receptors? I think this is
I hope I could ask the virus whether it's mutating that far, but highly unlikely.
I'm sorry to interrupt, sir. Dr. Nagmani madam is here, sir. She wants to speak.
Sure.
Hello.
Hello, Dr. Nagmani. Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Bashir.
Thank you for
Thank you for accepting all the samples and then giving us the result.
Yeah, thank you.
So in any further, have you detected any Delta plus variants?
Yeah, Delta plus, we are still analyzing, and we will send you the results. So it should be completed today or tomorrow. Yes.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
okay. Dr. Dimple is asking, it's the conference and then what she's saying is, my query is that while using COVID-seq on Illumina, have you got a complete genome sequence of what they analysis? Because they are apparently getting some gaps in the spike region.
Okay, I don't think we have gaps in the spike region. No, I don't think we have. But she can mail me whatever her exact issue is. We can look at it.
So Dimple, you can actually also mail us at Primas, and we can have a bioinformatician, address that query for you. He can take a look at your data and give you some pointers as to why you're getting gaps. Often what happens is, it's also a function of the sequencing depth, the initial library quality. So we probably have to look over all of those. So happy to kind of connect with you at our contact ID. Thanks. Dr. Sahil Sharma. So he's saying is, what he's saying is there was a delay in receiving results of whole genome sequencing at the state level, like almost about a month or more. By the time the new variant is identified, the spread is already there. So what, are the public health actions that, you can possibly take to prevent this?
Yeah, so we have been told again and again, and we have discussed this in our regular meetings. If we identify something which is potential, we immediately inform the state and the central officials. Whereas the regular sequencing, if everything is delta strain, then it goes through the regular analysis and we confirm everything and then report it. But if 1 or 2 samples we see something interesting which could be potentially harmful, then we report it immediately without waiting for the 5, 6, 7 steps for confirmation. So that's what we did for the AY.1 strain. I mean, the 2 samples that are listed in the government portal as positive from Telangana, these were not identified from samples that we received from the Sentinel sites. These were samples which CDFD routinely uses for RT-PCR. We are also a testing facility. We get samples for RT-PCR testing, and some of them we also sequence, and there we identified 2 AY.1 that although it didn't come from the Sentinel sites, we informed NCDC. The information was also going to the INSACOG portal, and we also immediately informed Gandhi and the GHMC, which is a Hyderabad Municipal Corporation. And yeah, that was done immediately. That's what everybody is doing.
So typically,
yes, good question.
What is the turnaround time, Dr. Ashwin, for, I suppose you get a set of samples? Because I think his concern is that, like once you get the samples, if it takes too long for sequencing or the data to be released or communicated.
Yeah. So again, repeating my answer, there are 2 aspects to this question. One is the regular screening, which takes time. But if we identified something which is urgent, we take action immediately. So that's the short answer to part A and part B of that question. But time taking, if you look at the samples, we receive samples for a fortnight. So if a sample which is collected on 1st of July, the state government waits till July 15, collects all the samples, then maybe it will take 2 days to reach CDFD. Let's say the sample collected on July 17th reaches us, July 1st reaches us on July 17th. Then even if we take 4 or 5 days to do everything, it's already 20 days away from that. But in parallel, like I mentioned, in addition to this Sentinel screening, we also get samples of unusual events. Like I mentioned, the Khammam case, where we just got the samples within 48 hours and did the sequencing immediately. So that was not part of the Sentinel site. So all the state governments have been informed. In addition to this regular screening, they should also look at these unusual cases. If there is a vaccine breakthrough, if there is a sudden cluster, sudden surge, or a reinfection case, these things are in addition to the Sentinel screening, and they are supposed to be sent as and when they arrive, and we sequence them immediately.
Okay. The next question is, how many COVID sequencing units are available now in India? I think he means centers, but I think
yeah, like I said, we started with 10. Now we are 28, and there are people who are not part of INSACOG but have the ability, and they've been sequencing on their own. So this is a worldwide initiative. Everybody who is sequencing the data goes to the GSID international portal, and anybody can look at those sequences, download, and do the analysis. But yes, right now as part of INSACOG, 10 plus 18, there are 28 labs, and there are a few other labs which have been doing it independent of INSACOG as well.
And is there any thought about opening up this entire effort to private sequencing labs, because a lot of private players also have to.
Yes, so right now the capacity in the public labs is huge actually. I mean, even if we were to increase the sample numbers by 10 or 50 fold, we still have the capacity to do it. But what is more important to have the private partnership is in terms of patients. So some of the corporate hospitals have a very well-defined patient network and follow-up. So what I mentioned about the long-term study is where we can partner with private hospitals like Apollo or some other chain, where it's a country-wide network. They have very good patient follow-up and records. So they can collaborate with us to say, okay, we have these 100 patients. We have followed them up for 2-3 months or 4 months post-recovery, and these are the complications. We would like to sequence them to see if any variant is associated with these complications, vis-a-vis patients who had no complication. So those kind of things is under plan to, have a public-private partnership.
Or even the diagnostic teams, the diagnostic labs, because anyways, they've been doing a lot of
Yes,
real-time
yes.
tests and all. So they have the access to samples, they have access to patients.
So so that's not part of INSACOG, but some of the government laboratories are working, like I said, on therapeutic options, or also to have novel rapid diagnostic kits. These are ultimately going to the private labs, which is a huge network, to test and say, in addition to the government labs, it also goes to the private labs for testing.
There's a question from Shivani. She says, if the genomic sequence is known, is it possible to find out all the possible mutations that the virus
Yes, so it's funny. I was thinking about this, that I would include it in my talk, but I didn't. So yeah, somebody can sit at home and there are like 29.9 thousand positions and there are 20 amino acids. So each position to 29,000 to the power of 20 is the combinations you can get. Just do your mathematics. And I don't know. I mean, there are people who do this synthetic biology research. So, I mean, using bioinformatics pipeline, you can narrow down these combinations to a finite number, and then maybe synthesize the virus with those changes and then check. Yeah, I mean, it's possible, but hugely cost intensive.
We have time for one last question, which says, I think we've answered it in the previous speaker session also. You have serial and PCR is more pervasive, right, in terms of detection of mutants. So at the real-time PCR level, can we make arrangements to detect the variants?
Yes, so that is something which INSACOG considered, but we dropped that option. So it is possible to, let's say, if you want to screen for Delta variant, there are 7 signature mutations. So you have a primer set for these 7 mutations. You do the real time. It's very easy to quickly detect. But the problem there is, which defeats the purpose of establishment of INSACOG, then you're not looking at novel variants. You cannot. So you can identify, okay, this is alpha variant in this population, this is delta, this is gamma. But what about the new variants or new mutations that are emerging? So we decided deliberately to not go into that direction, but do the whole genome sequence.
I think as a previous speaker alluded, he said that the rate of changes or the rate of mutations in the viral genome that we've been seeing has been pretty fast, and to standardize an average RT-PCR test by the time you include those primers, get a validation done, get an approval from a regulatory body. By the time you get it in the market, you have another variant of concern which has come up. As what we've been seeing over the past few months.
Yeah, but you can still do it for the existing variants, and the kits are available for Delta. But the main problem is you're not detecting the. If there is a new variant now, and within 4 or 5 weeks, you can establish that and then start screening for that variant. It is definitely useful, but the only drawback is you can't look at novel variants.
Sure. Cool. Thanks so much. I think.
Okay. Sorry, I just have. Hi. Sorry, I just have one last question. Is that okay?
Go ahead.
Hello, sir. Great talk. My name is Krishna, and I'm a master's student from University of Alberta, Canada. My question is, like, this pandemic is something that we haven't foreseen or have to like adapt and come up with some novel approaches to study and understand it. Can you mention some of the technical challenges regarding the infrastructure to handle the data influx, or in developing the bioinformatics pipelines for reconstructing the SARS-CoV-2 virus, or do you see like any areas that are needing like any urgent technical improvements?
Yeah, so my very short answer is no, but I'll define that answer. So the genomics revolution happened 20 to 30 years back, and it's been so well tuned to look at. I gave you 2 examples, cancer and genetic disorders. It's been going on for 20, 25 years. And the computational experts are so adept now to, establish a pipeline for any sequence-based analysis. It hardly took time for them to make the computational analysis pipelines to reconstruct the SARS-CoV-2 virus, generation of the FASTA, or to have a pipeline to identify low or high frequency mutations. And there are more than one pipelines available, but most of the labs are using a single pipeline or a variant of that pipeline. And so therefore, personally for me or the labs in India, that it was not a technical challenge. But yes, depending on the question that you're asking, there could be technical challenges. But presently, the important questions that I have highlighted in my talk, including the host genetics part, I'm sure we have the technical wherewithal to address these questions.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Basham. I think we passed the time, but I'm sure most of the attendees haven't minded it because I think it was a very engaging discussion. And thank you so much for patiently listening to all the questions and answering them. And I hope people are a little more enlightened on the specifics of genomic sequence-based surveillance and the merits that it brings to our pandemic management. And till we meet again with the next speaker in the series, is goodbye and have a great rest of the week.
Thank you. Thank you, Devjani. I also thank Premas for inviting me and hope it was useful for everybody. Have a good day and all the best. Thank you.
Bye.
Accurately on the time. So please stay with us.
Okay, is this visible?
Yes, it's visible, sir.
I think looks okay.
So I think we'll start in about 5 minutes at 10:30.
Hey Dev, I just checked with Dr. Bashram. He's just joining in like 1 or 2 minutes.
Okay, fine. Perfect.